All right, 2 minutes after the top of the hour, whichever hour that may be for you, let's kick off our first ADDI roundtable, and I will pass it over to Tetsu.
Well, thanks very much, Caitlin. First, thank you for organizing this along with the team. I'm really excited about what's going to happen here today. This is ADDI's first researcher roundtable. We hope that there are going to be a lot of these afterwards. We're very grateful to all the many people who are online already and those who've registered, we hope will be coming along soon, that are going to make this a success. And especially, of course, to our esteemed panel and moderator. Really excited to have this group here, largely because of the importance of the topic that we want to discuss today, diversity in dementia research, as with diversity in other areas of research, is very belatedly becoming an important topic of study. We know all the reasons why it's important. It's going to be great, however, to really dig into this with people who are living it on a daily basis and making a difference, both in terms of bringing diversity to dementia research, but also forwarding that cause, which is really the main reason for bringing diversity in. ADDI is kind of offering a stage for this discussion. Really, though, in many ways, we are listening in with everybody else, because it's our intention to learn more about what we, as well as everyone else, can do in order to address this really important topic. I'd love to hear everybody's opinions on this during the event. There'll be Q&A afterwards, and we also, Caitlin, if she has not done so already, is going to put a link to the AD Connect forum into the chat here right now. Again, this is to start a discussion here that we can carry on AD Connect for as long as everyone remains interested in it, which should be for a really, really long time. So we hope both to connect everyone here to each other and also to the AD Connect community for broader discussion. Obviously, the point of being here is to challenge each other with this discussion and to continue doing so in the future, but also to identify ways that we can act. And so I don't want to take any more time away from this distinguished panel of people who are already acting to address diversity in dementia research, and let them have at. So thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you, Tetsu. Yes, just a quick note, if you would like to ask a question, simply use the Q&A chat bubbles at the bottom to type your question. If you'd like to ask it verbally, once Alexis opens the floor for Q&A, please raise your hand and we will unmute you so you're able to ask your question. So Alexis, I'll turn it over to you if you would introduce yourself and then have the panelists introduce themselves and get the discussion going. Thank you.
Fantastic. And thank you so much for the introduction. I really appreciate it. And thank you everyone who has joined us so far again for joining us for this first ADDI Researcher Roundtable. Again, our topic today is the importance of diversity in dementia research. And I appreciate that call to action in the introduction. I think that's the theme that we're hopefully going to tap into today. Again, I would like to thank the Alzheimer's Disease Data Initiative for offering this platform. And first, it would be my pleasure to introduce our esteemed panel today. First on my screen here, I see Dr. Rhoda Au, who is a professor at Boston University and a director of neuropsychology for the Framingham Heart Study, and director of the Global Cohort Development Program for the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative. Her work includes research on cognitive aging and dementia, with a focus on using technologies to develop a customizable, multi-sensory brain health monitoring platform. And her strategic research plan is to transition from reliance on active engagement technologies to low or no engagement ones. She actively supports broad data sharing and accessibility initiatives to accelerate data science and AI-driven discovery of digital biomarkers. Thank you so much, Dr. Au, for joining us today. I believe you're not in the office now. I think you're on the road traveling. So thank you so much for making the time to join us to have this conversation.
No, really great. It's great to be here. And I actually am in Nairobi.
Oh.
So it's very appropriate for this conversation.
Well, thank you so much again for joining us. I really look forward to hearing your perspective today. Next on my screen, I see Dr. Sammy Danso. Thank you so much for being here. He is an honorary academic fellow in applied artificial intelligence and data science at the Center for Clinical Brain Sciences. He is also a fellow at the Information Commissioner's Office of the United Kingdom, where he leads research projects to shape policy on use of AI technologies to drive the UK economy. Previously, he worked for the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and the Health Service of Ministry of Health in Ghana for over a decade. He is currently the principal investigator of a number of projects, including an examination of drivers of privacy breaches in AI models, as well as digital phenotyping to detect early risk factors of dementia in lower and middle income populations. Thank you so much again, Dr. Danso, for joining us today. I'm so thrilled to hear about your perspective, especially coming from the world of AI.
Thanks so much, Alex. Good to be here.
Thank you. And last but not least, it is my pleasure to introduce DY Suharya. DY is the Regional Director of Alzheimer's Disease International Asia Pacific region, overseeing activities in 17 countries in the Asia Pacific region that aims to improve the quality of life of people with dementia and their caregivers. She is also the founder of Alzheimer Indonesia, a non-governmental organization working to increase dementia and Alzheimer's awareness and risk reduction in Indonesia. DY holds more than 20 years of experience in public health, public-private partnerships, and communication. She has worked as a health communication consultant with the World Bank, WHO, and UNICEF. And in addition to her role at Alzheimer Indonesia, DY works closely with WHO and the Indonesia's Ministry of Health. And I know you've also been quite busy as of late, so thank you so much for making the time to join us, especially I think we're working at opposite time zones here. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure is all mine. Alexis, thank you for having me. Thank you for Tetsu reaching out, inviting me and linking me out with Caitlin. So I'm here from Jakarta, Indonesia.
Well, thank you again so much to our panelists. I can say a few words about myself before we get going. Hopefully I've met many of our audience members through the AD Connect forum or maybe the hackathon, but again, my name is Alexis Oddi, and I'm currently serving as a clinical research coordinator at the UCSF Memory and Aging Center. I work jointly under Dr. Jennifer Yokoyama and under Dr. Joanna Helmuth. And my introduction to ADDI and the AD Workbench was through the Data Sharing to Promote Collaboration and Discovery in FTD initiative, which is a project funded by the Tau Consortium and led by Dr. Yokoyama. So before joining UCSF, my background in education began at UC Berkeley, where I studied data science and urban science. So I'm so thrilled to kind of be here today and talk about data science. And especially after joining UCSF, I became increasingly passionate about how neurology, data science, and social justice intersect in many ways. So thrilled to be your moderator today. And perhaps we can start our conversation. I think perhaps a logical place to start would be for our panelists to help us define and discuss the word diversity itself, as I imagine it has many meanings for many people personally, as well as for people operating in different countries. So for us to start perhaps and get a baseline about what the meaning is, not to pick on Dr. O, she's the first on my screen. I imagine most of our panelists will have something to say here, but Dr. O, would you mind starting off and helping us define the word diversity, what that might mean for you personally?
Sure, I think diversity actually has many different dimensions to it. So I think there's this idea of diversity about who we study, which is often what we think about when we're talking about diversity. But there's also who does the studying. And in the realm of, so if I go back to now who we study, and certainly within the realm of dementia, I think about several different factors, right? So certainly racial, ethnic diversity is very important because we need to find solutions that are representative of everyone, not just a few. And that's certainly been a problem, at least in the AD research world. But there's other aspects of diversity too that I think get a little bit less mentioned. And that's this idea that income levels, so certainly low income, middle income, as well as high income. So you have the LMICs, and I don't think that's just countries, by the way, because you can have low and high, middle resource settings in high income areas, right? And vice versa. So that's another piece. And then the other piece I think about is age, because we talk about dementia and Alzheimer's disease as a life course disease. But if you look, the bias of our data is actually in the upper decades of life. And since I happen to be in Nairobi right now and have just spent the last few days understanding the importance of the earlier years of life, right? And so that under 25, I think has been really neglected in terms of thinking about sort of the complexity of this disease and how risk is actually something that you accumulate over time. And then finally, if we go to who does the studying, unfortunately, we don't have all the voices of the world. And this is where I think ADDI, by the way, is really playing a very pivotal role in allowing voices from wherever they are to come together, because you can look at the same data, but from different perspectives, you will see very different things. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for that definition, and definitely multifaceted already. I see our discussion is beginning to become. DY or Dr. Danso, do you have any additional definitions or perspectives to share?
I think Rhoda just sum everything up beautifully. I just think the importance of diversity is what makes us unique. And as a federation, I'm from Alzheimer's Disease International, a federation of more than 100 associations. These are the things that makes how our research work unique, is because we reach out to our members from 105 associations in recruiting studies and all that, and we ask for their help and understanding of their cultural context. So in terms of definition, I couldn't agree more of what Rhoda said earlier.
Yes, so if I may add a little, definitely, I think the definition that Rhoda has given is really the exact definition that I also had in mind. I will just add that I'm an example of diversity because, you know, my background is in computer science and AI, and so naturally you find myself in the, you know, computing world, you know, but I happen to find myself in the dementia AI, I mean dementia space, applying AI methods to dementia problem. And I also see diversity in terms of the methods. You know, there are so many ways of looking at or dealing with dementia, and the methods also very important, and approaches to it, you know, as well. You know, I see a lot of work being done around the clinical aspect of it. We can also look at the prevention side of things and all that. So these are all areas that we can look at if we talk about diversity in AD research. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution. I appreciate the perspective of diversity of methods as another way to look at diversity. I think we touched on this a little bit, but before moving forwards, I also think it would be important for us to maybe develop what a baseline understanding of why diversity is important, and specifically in the field of AD research. And I think we have again, sort of an implicit understanding of this, but maybe we could discuss why it's important scientifically, why that diversity of methods is important to the science, but also why it's important to our fostering strong and resilient research communities, why diversity is an asset there. DY, do you have any contributions perhaps to understanding why diversity might be important to fostering strong organizations, as I know you're a leader of organizations in the field?
Yes, there is not enough diversity, to be honest, in terms of the facts, because since most of clinical trials are happening in the UK, Australia, Canada, USA, high-income countries. So I'm just you know, coming from a middle income country, overseeing 20 countries in Asia Pacific, there is an increase of research needs, but still a tiny amount of funding and also on research as well. And diversity play a crucial role on that. It's just not enough. And I think it's just something that I'm very happy to be a part of this panel because it's like Rhoda said earlier, the diversity context, who we're studying is related to the cultural context. In my case, because the organization is voicing the voice of people with dementia and family carers, it's important. Last week, I was facilitating a session on a national dementia symposium in Malaysia, involving all researchers from Hong Kong, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Singapore. And it's the very first time they actually invited, and I managed to get family carers who are champions on their field. And finally, their voices are being heard by the government of Malaysia, for instance. So it's just like, it's important to have these voices of people with dementia and family carers with all the different culture involved in the beginning of design, instead of being, at the end of the day, at the end of the design. And that's something that happens with ADI, Alzheimer's Disease International. We receive invitations to participate in certain work, but it would be great to have been invited in the beginning of the whole process, because it's really important to represent the people with dementia and family carers from the very beginning. I hope it makes sense.
Absolutely.
Alex.
Thank you so much for that perspective, especially from the point of view of someone who was a caregiver and now is kind of leading organizations, the importance of involving all different types of individuals who are impacted by Alzheimer's disease. I was also hoping to touch on perhaps the scientific importance of diversity and why it's important, as we mentioned earlier, the diversity of methods in our research, but also the importance of recruiting diverse study participants, as those end up the people represented in the data that we see on the AD workbench, for example. Does Dr. Au or perhaps Dr. Danso want to touch on the scientific value of diversity?
So Sammy, you want to go ahead and then I'll follow you?
Right. Okay. Thanks. So, Prof. Martin Prince and colleagues did look at the projection of dementia, the burden, and they projected that by the year 2030, we'll have about over 65 million people having dementia. And a large proportion of that will be in lower middle income country. That alone, if you read that paper, it argues that it's not only a scientific problem, it's a human rights problem. Because, and as you go further, by 2050, the gap will even be wider in terms of the burden. And that's really, it's really important to take note of. There's also the need for data, as we diversify and we get more data in, then we can have, sophisticated models to build, to be able to, develop prediction models and all that. We can take an example of the current trend, which is ChatGPT. ChatGPT is all over the place now, and it's doing amazingly well because of data. They feed huge amounts of data to build a neural network that has over 175 billion parameters. And to be able to train that to that scale, a model to that scale, you need a huge amount of data. And that will only be possible if you're able to diversify and get data from different sources to put in one place. So I think it's really, really important, and scientifically it's been proven elsewhere that it's possible. So I think we can do it. So I will leave it there for Rhoda to take a look here.
Yeah, just building on some of what Sammy has said, we know that dementia and Alzheimer's disease is a heterogeneous disease, right? So it's multiple different etiologies. And so part of the problem is if we don't have the data, we don't have the appropriate data, we're actually going to be limiting sort of the, the pathways that we're discovering. And, the pathways are really dictating then the kinds of treatments that we're starting to deliver. So what happens is when we have very restricted data on, on non-representative, concentrations of the population, then we end up with actually treatments that are only effective for some and not all. I always like to say, I was born in the US, so I'm American by birth, but I actually am Chinese by blood. And so I personally learned a long time ago that medications weren't actually titrated very well for me. And so I learned to avoid medications because I realized they were never developed for me, for me. And so I think, that's just an anecdotal, but that is the importance of sort of why we need scientifically. One, we're going to understand the etiology of this disease, which is multifactorial, right? And we're only going to do that if we can do it by bringing in people who have multiple different combinations of these risk factors. And then on top of that, then we're going to drive solutions that are being much more effective on a global basis. And as Sammy pointed out, we have an aging population worldwide, and this epidemic of dementia, Alzheimer's disease is only going to get worse. And it's going to actually get worse in some of these developing countries and that we have not been studying. So I think that those are some of the reasons. We're not going to get to a precision medicine objective, which we all talk about, the right treatment for the right person at the right time, because we're not collecting the kind of information that we need in the way in order to make that possible.
Thank you very much for all of those perspectives. And I think maybe we could also aim to define what success would actually look like. How can we measure success? When do we reach the end? If there even is an end to what achieving diversity means in our field. And again, that success might look like success in enrollment for clinical trials. It might look like the population of researchers. Do any of our panelists have maybe a personal measurement that they're using as their bar to success? And again, I think this success might also look different in different countries and different institutions. So if anyone has a bar they're using to define success, I would love to learn more about that.
An environment which every countries in the world have research in their countries, I think we can start from there, and researchers share the data and work together, complement each other. I think we have achieved a lot so far since in Asia Pacific, for instance, there's all these initiatives wanting to work together because of the network in Asia Pacific specifically. So having more researchers working together, in representing the voice of people with dementia, family carers, we connect with institutions as well and private sectors. So this is why it's very important to have this diversity. And success means, we have that from the local, national, regional, and global level. So yeah, that's from my end.
Yeah, so just to add to that, exactly. I mean, the getting involvement from people, it's one of the measurements of success. I also look at the availability of platforms, tools, and data all together, especially if you want to carry out cross-sectional, demographics and all that. You need data from different sources. And I think this is where ADDI is really taking the lead and leadership, because I've personally used the platform and the availability of the tools. You're able to build models easily, test your models and all that. So I think if you want to look at success, that's a starting point, but I want to see more data coming in from different sources in order to be able to develop much more comprehensive models. So I'll stop there for now. Thanks.
Yeah, I think for me, I guess I have sort of 3 different levels of success. So on the one hand, sort of at a pragmatic level, I think it's about us having tools that can be deployed anywhere by anyone. So both in terms of assessment tools, analytic capabilities. I think for assessment tools, we need to create ones that are age, education, gender, culture, language agnostic. I think that too much of what we do is so biased. That's why we're not achieving sort of the kind of diversity that we've now all talked about. I think at a bigger level, a higher level, success would mean equal opportunity science. I would like, and then it gets back to sort of my original, it's equal in terms of who we study and also who's doing the study. And we don't have that at this point. And then I would tell you success at a personal level is that I'm going to become obsolete and no one's going to be interested in what I'm doing. And I think that would be a really great sign of success.
Thank you so much for outlining that. I appreciate the 3-pronged approach, and it's really interesting to hear how different everyone measures it. And I think maybe having a better understanding of what success means in different environments is actually how we can move towards that level of success. So next, I really would actually love to zoom in and learn more about the backgrounds of our panelists, and specifically within the context of our topic for today. So do any of our panelists perhaps have an example of when they overcame a challenge or a barrier in achieving diversity in their own research career, or perhaps in a study that they led? And again, this might look like all the definitions of diversity we've already defined. So recruiting diverse participants, or perhaps obtaining resources for a study. I would love to hear any. I know we mentioned an anecdote earlier, but I would love to hear any anecdotes, and then perhaps how our panelists were able to overcome that challenge in their own research. And I know that's a big question, but if anyone has any any examples from their own career, or perhaps stories from their own institution as it was developing, or organization as it was developing.
Yeah. I mean, I can take a crack at this. So I think that in terms of from a work standpoint, this idea of maximizing inclusivity really puts you up as being unconventional which is very difficult actually in a peer-reviewed environment, because you're trying to push then toward directions. To maximize inclusivity, you have to do things like give up the word exclusive. Right? You have to give up exclusion criteria. And when you give up exclusion criteria, you start to violate every principle of scientific methods that are out there, right? The study design, the study protocol, and now that you're collecting data that's very, inclusive and itself very, messy, I would say from that standpoint, you're going to talk about different kinds of analytic methods that you're going to need. And I think that the other thing that we need to think about that's really a challenge is overcoming the concept of a gold standard, because we forget that gold standards were actually developed on very biased methods and data and people. And so I don't understand why we always want to anchor ourselves back to what we've done, but what we've done isn't appropriately representative. And that's actually really hard. It's easy to say, and it's actually really hard to do, because you're always going against convention. So I would say, that's, and, just personally, I got to tell you, being a Chinese woman in this field is not easy. And it is really hard sometimes to be heard in an equal way. There's a lot of stereotypes around Chinese and how they're supposed to act. Personally, I don't know how to code. Like, I don't know how to do any analyses. I'm terrible at it. And because I'm a little bit out of type, that can also be a little bit challenging.
I can relate to what Rhoda said actually perfectly on that. And that's, there's also all these issues on gender, being a woman in Asia with certain governments that they are ruled by male dominance. It's been really tough. So we just have to work around that. Thanks, Rhoda, for bringing that up.
if I may add a little bit to it. Capacity in developing countries has been one of the problems, because there's lack of expertise, and I think that's one of the reasons why we are unable to generate the data that we have. So as part of the study that leading on, one of the objectives is to be able to build capacity in developing countries. So, for example, once you have the tools, how would they be able to use those tools, those analytical tools that we built? How are they able to apply those knowledge locally and all that? So that's one of the and I think using a leapfrog approach will be the best way to do it. So learning from the experts from the developed countries and exporting that knowledge to having north-south collaboration to be able to bridge the gap. And one of the studies I've been leading on, that has been one of the objectives.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing. And I know that's leading into being a quite a difficult question to answer. So I appreciate everyone's perspective on that. And I know, DY, earlier, you also mentioned that for the first time, a caregiver was invited to the panel, right? So very recently, still working through not only diversity recruiting, not only diversity at an institutional level, but just who is being invited to the table. So I appreciate hearing more about everyone's experience.
So Alexis, what I want to add is these families of carers, they had career in UN, they have excellent careers, and they had to give it up to take care of their mom, their mother-in-law, for 10 years, more than 10 years. And they got invited only as an object to events, and it's hosted by the government as a checklist, not even, giving them the opportunity. So I was so pleased to manage to advocate this. It was a collaboration between Alzheimer Disease International and Newcastle University, University Malaya in Malaysia, and Monash University in Malaysia as well, with ADI, and involving family carers that's been working on their journey of caring, and including like a good hour of that session, and having people with dementia from Singapore flew all the way, a young onset dementia person. And it's covered by the media in Malaysia as well. So a week before that, my CEO, Paula, we secured a meeting between the Minister of Health Malaysia with her, and we voiced this. But when the event happened, these high-level people did not attend, and pass it on to the mid-level or other levels in the ministry. That's just showing the lack of commitment. The interesting part was the former Minister of Health was so vocal because his father-in-law, Prime Minister of Malaysia, former, was diagnosed with dementia, but it took him 10 years or more to finally talk about it in the media. And then they have a new Minister of Health now. So it's a challenge.
Thank you. Thank you so much again for expanding on that. And I know that the challenges of achieving diversity in AD research, it's important to talk about, but maybe we can also balance that with our success stories and how we're moving towards that success. Dr. O, did you have I saw you unmuted. Did you have anything to add to DY's point?
No, I actually was going to add to Sammy's point. I was just actually going to, because he brought up the idea of the experts, and I would like to actually challenge that a little bit and saying that maybe the people in the high income countries aren't really very good experts. They're certainly not good experts in your part of, I'm in Africa right now. I can tell you, I am decidedly not an expert here. And so I think that we need to be a little bit more expansive. I think we need to rethink, because we, presumably the experts again created the challenges that we now face, right? We have biased data with biased findings using biased tools. So I'm not sure that the experts are actually the ones we really want to follow. And I really think it's really the people on the ground that aren't being represented. They're the ones who we need to listen to. We need to let them lead. And we need to follow their path, because that's the only path that's going to get us to this reality. I think Tetsu put in, there's more genetic diversity here in Africa. And I think I really got an eyeful of how much that is the case, and how much the methods that we have developed and decided are the right methods are leaving out people. And we have to sort of rethink this idea that we know, that anybody knows what's really the right way to do this if we're really going to achieve true global diversity.
Thank you, and I appreciate. I'll allow Dr. Danso the opportunity to respond, but I appreciate the bringing up the perspective of how we can better ground truth. I think is the terminology that our research. So, Dr. Danso, you can go ahead.
Yes, I think I agree with Rhoda to a large extent, but my definition is co-design. So we don't impose what we know on developers, but we share our experience, so that based on the experience, they can then co-design proper methods. So that's how I meant by collaboration, and I think that some of the tools that, just lack of resources, in developing countries. If you take AI, for example, we haven't got those platforms that we can use in developing countries to build those models. We have to rely on, systems elsewhere, and we can only do that if we're able to collaborate and train those in the developing countries how to use those tools. So I meant capacity development and then sharing of experience, but not imposing what we know on. Obviously, they are experts within their the local communities. So we also have to learn something from them anyway. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you. I also like co-design. That's another great summary of that perspective.
Yeah, I like those keywords. Rhoda mentioned lead. We need to let them lead, and Sammy mentioned the wording co-design. I think we have to get this words happening and in action, and not it just needs to kind of snowballing in all aspects, and everyone needs to really implement it based on that philosophy of those two keywords. For instance, I got really, that's so powerful and influential. Nothing against really focusing on the whole data technical side of it, but having that human rights aspect of involvement, equality, that's very important.
Yeah, if I could add just a little bit to that, because for me, having now, I have a little Africa on my brain right now, but what I'm really struck by while I'm here is the opportunity for discovery, and particularly in the realm of prevention. One of the things that you don't want to do is actually follow the path of the higher income countries, because we've done a really good job of creating lots and lots of chronic diseases, and including, very much increased risk for dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And because we know that this is a life course disease, there's actually a real opportunity here to leverage sort of the talent that's on the ground, particularly in collecting data in the earlier periods of life. And this is literally from infancy up until, let's say, early adulthood. And, if we could just harness that knowledge, power, capacity, and really focus it on this concept of prevention, I think I see this continent being able to lead on this path toward what's the really rich pathways for prevention, and which I don't think that the higher income countries have done a great job of doing.
Thank you again for adding to this conversation. I see Zara in the Q&A section added a question about what we suggest doing now an immediate action that we can take to kind of bridge these gaps. And this made me think of a publication I read that came out, I think last week, which was a publication from the Diversifying the Community of Neuroscience program, which is a program out of the University of Minnesota. And in this program, they interviewed first-generation graduate students in order to better understand how professional or scientific mentorship can impact the trajectory of scientists, early career scientists who might come from diverse backgrounds, in this case, first generation. So I was wondering if any of our panelists have any thoughts about maybe a positive or even a negative mentorship experience in their own career that affected their trajectory, or perhaps giving advice to audience members who might have an established research group for how they can use mentorship as a tool to foster successful, diverse research environments. As I know, many of the audience members today might be mentors in their own right, or they might be trainees, and mentorship could be an avenue to really take action that our audiences can use moving forward.
So I'm going to confess, I tell this to anybody who actually comes to me seeking mentorship. I actually tell them I'm a terrible mentor, and I'm a terrible mentor because I'm like so busy. But and so I'm in too many different things, doing too many different places, et cetera. What I think I probably do is I create opportunities. I'm pretty good at enabling opportunities for people, so that if I understand what's their interest, what's their pathway, what are the things that they're really hoping to push forward. What I do is, as I, move around, I can push things their way. So I'm not great at mentoring. Part of it is because I keep going into fields that I have no business being in. Like, I can't mentor someone in data science AI because I told you I don't know how to code anything. So part of it is I see, the solutions here are many, multidisciplinary, and I have like so limited knowledge in any one particular area. And my case, actually no knowledge in a number of areas. So I think that doesn't make me a very good mentor, but I do think that because I try to embrace all different kinds of disciplines. I hope that by doing that helps to create pathways for people to move forward.
So if I may add a little bit. So I would say I've benefited from mentorship because, from my background, so AI, and then coming to this space, I have had a privilege of working with top experts within the area, and I've had the opportunity to learn, how they approach research in this space and all that. So I'm here on the panel because of the great mentorship that I received from. And Rhoda is also an example. She thinks that she's not a good mentor, but I think that she is, because she's great. Well, she's mentoring and creating opportunities for some of us to be able to carry out the research that we want to carry out in developing countries. So yes, exactly. Mentorship is a key factor, and especially if you want to think about the next generation early career researchers, then mentorship as a tool.
Thank you very much for that contribution. And DY, did you have anything to add about maybe mentorship experiences in your own life, or how you've maybe become a mentor now that you're leading different?
Yeah, I have been a mentor for the past decade or so, and of course I'm also busy, and I understand what Rhoda was saying, but I believe in connecting the dots. So once I identify their strengths and helping them to make sure what they're doing create an impact, and link it up to the whole big ecosystem. Like, so an example of Stride project in Indonesia and India, for instance, the work resulted to a policy brief So I managed to get the Ministry of Health from Indonesia to listen to this policy brief and really get the high level, the influential people, and get these early career researchers understand, unless they deliver and address these findings and propose a concrete, clear action that linked to the nation's health strategy, it would take longer time. So the whole connecting the dots as a mentor, trying to get them to understand, at the end of the day, it's the whole impact, the overall nation, people with dementia in Indonesia, for instance, and getting that undivided attention for 30 minutes from a minister is not easy. And that's one of the things. As a mentor, I managed to have these connections and network and link them up, and now balls are rolling. Pilots of out of that policy brief are being implemented. It's embedded. It's part of it. It's endorsed by the nation from the ministry level. But it took like 2-3 years of work, So nothing is instant. But I enjoy that whole journey, and they do have to have that perseverance, determination that it never stops, So.
Thank you. That is much appreciated, and it sounds like the mentorship is a time commitment. Is what I'm hearing, and not only time on behalf of the mentor, but just time to open up those pathways and enable the younger scientists to actually get where they're going, and through the help of their mentor. So I appreciate that. I also wanted to recognize the platform that we are on today, the Alzheimer's Disease Data Initiative, and a number of times the impact of data has been brought up. And so I was hoping that we could continue that conversation and understand a bit more specifically in the realm of data sharing, how we can, as data providers or perhaps data contributors, how can we encourage diversity in ADRD research through data sharing, what that might look like, and again, what are the challenges to overcoming perhaps the lack of diversity that we're seeing specifically in the endpoint here. So when the data is being shared, what are those challenges, and perhaps how can we overcome the lack of diversity that we see in data right now?
Well, I can sort of jump in a little bit. I think one of the things, if we want to really encourage pulling in data that already exists, we need to not be critical of the data. So I think that in order to get data from everyone, we have to not say, well, it has to have this, and it has to have this, and it can't have this, and et cetera, right? Because when you look globally, people collect data in many different ways. And so what we tend to do is we tend to say, well, I'm only looking for data that's this and this and this. And that's because one of the things we continuously do is we continuously try to fit our science into methods that we know. And I think having a platform like the ADDI, which can, potentially then take all comers, regardless of sort of how you collected the data, where you collected, and allowing that and a community to come together, then you can start to, what I always admire is the ingenuity of people. So if we bring together data that's considered by gold standards less ideal, I guarantee you that if you put it to the people and you put it to the data science AI community and you say, here is actually data that's representative, how can we work with it in a way for a scientific discovery? We'll find new ways to do that. I like to remind people in 1948, when Framingham Heart Studies started, there was no such thing as regression analyses. There wasn't logistic, no one knew about multiple regression, right? We didn't have the concept of risk factors, by the way. We didn't know blood pressure could be high. What we did was we collected data, and then we started to develop the methods to fit the science that we were trying to pursue. And I think that the ADDI can bring that spirit and really bring it now into the realm where we've not made as much progress as you would have thought we could have. And that's in this area of brain health.
If I may add a little bit to that. So looking at a good example, during the COVID period, there was this database that was set up. It was set up in 2006, a long time ago, but they were struggling to get people to donate data, just like the way ADI has been set up for genomic analysis. But when the COVID problem came up and all that, there was a shift in culture. So everybody started donating data to this platform, which is called the GIS-8 platform, developed by University of Michigan. And on this platform, at the moment, they have over 1 million, entries data points on that platform, and it has enabled a lot of discovery about the COVID virus. So we could learn from that and apply that to what you're doing, especially ADDI, if there's a shift in culture from the researchers, because at the moment, just like we don't support data sharing. So people are working in silos. So if we can shift that culture to a culture where we want to support data sharing, we want to share our data for the community, that will be good. But that has to be done with the context of good governance. So very, very good data governance around that and ethics to make sure that we don't, take advantage of those that donate data to us. So I think that's one of the things we should take into account. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate that reminder about ethics and not taking advantage of these research participants who may be coming from underserved populations who are contributing this data. And thank you again for that contribution. DY, I was actually wondering if you had any thoughts about perhaps the perspective of being a data contributor, being the person represented in the data, if you had any recommendations for people who are leading studies and doing outreach, not only to the patients themselves, but also the caregivers who are perhaps not as represented in the data as they should be. I know that there's, of course, many considerations to take into place, not only when collecting the data, but also how we're communicating to research participants, how their data is going to be shared, where their data is going. Yeah. So I would love to hear your thoughts, any recommendations you might have to people who are designing the studies, how they can approach that.
Yeah, again, first things first, the first step is to be mindful, including involving people with dementia and family carers in the design from the beginning of research, from the very start. Person with dementia of all ethnicities, races, sex, gender, socioeconomic backgrounds, building trust, listen and include their views in the design and implementation to ensure access. And because we are a federation of more than 100 associations, for Asia Pacific, I'm happy to facilitate linking early career researchers to our members in Asia Pacific, to work closely together, because, the president of the Geriatric Society in Malaysia, we're so happy that I connect her to the person with dementia and family carers, Malaysian, who lives in Dubai, who lives in the Middle East, who lives in other countries or in Malaysia as well, that they rarely meet them or connect with them. And these people have potentials and have everything they're so committed in the whole process of this. It's just a matter of bringing them in the platform and making sure that the whole guidelines are all there. So, again, ADI is the voice of people with dementia family carers, and we'd like to have our main community to be always included and from the very beginning.
Thank you. And I really appreciate that reminder from the beginning. It's not something that could really happen in the middle of a study design. It needs to happen in the beginning to encourage that, so that the data at the end reflects those.
Yeah. And also because these people literally came to me and say, thank you so much for involving us, because in the past they felt they were being objectified, they were being used. And that's already a human rights issue, whether you like it or not. But we still need to learn from each other on these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again to all of our panelists for the insights. I realize we are about 15 minutes to the end of our talk today, and I wanted to make sure that we're leaving room to answer any audience questions, and I've seen that a number have come through. But perhaps we could also return to, I think, one of the themes of today, which was the call to action. So moving past a point where we're just talking about this issue, but towards a point where perhaps our audience tomorrow or in the week after can actually take an action on what we've been discussing today. So before we kind of move into the audience Q&A, I was hoping that maybe one of our panelists or two could share some closing remarks on any advice that they have for individuals, how they can encourage and act upon the principles of diversity that we've discussed today, or if perhaps moving beyond just one audience member, how institutions or governments at large can really act upon what we've been talking about. How can they make that success happen? So if any of our panelists have any calls to action, I would love to use that as a transition point to taking our audience questions.
So I can say that one of the things, if I think one of the first things you can do is you can make inclusivity one of your key objectives. Because when you do that, it really makes you sort through what you can do. So if you're not going to exclude anybody, what kind of assessment tools can you actually use, right? So for instance, one of the things that I have focused on, we do this in the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, is we focus on two sources of data, digital and blood. And the reason we came upon those two is because a smartphone is the most penetrating technology in the world, right? Nearly 7 billion people have a smartphone, and a smartphone has multiple sensors in it from which to capture information. And in this case, it can be cognitively brain health related measures, and then blood, because both with digital and blood, what happens is that you have two extraordinary resources that can be looked at and measured in many different ways. As we know, from a single drop of blood, you can measure different kinds of indices, right? Well, turns out, I like to tell this is my new tagline, digital is the new blood. Because just like you can do with blood, with digital, you can store it, you can analyze it, you can store it for what's coming down the future. And it turns out most people can then collect it because most people have a smartphone and most places know how to collect blood. So when you're thinking about maximizing inclusivity, it really, really narrows down what are your scientific methods that you can work with.
Thank you. And I think that really touched on a point here from Amonida, who asked, thank you for the excellent conversation connected to the topic of data sharing. The term data democratization has become very popular in life sciences where data is generated. So she asked, what does data democratization mean to the panelists? And I think in one way, you mentioned smartphones. That's one way where data has become quite democratized. But do any of our other panelists like to share their thoughts on data democratization and perhaps how that is connected to our topic of diversity today?
Yeah, I think one of the factors will be availability of tools that can be used to analyze those data. So once you have the data, the tools, the technology that can support the storage and analysis is also important. And I think that's one of the objectives of ADDI. With my experience, I think that it's a very good start. And if you, with the needed support, you'll be able to, democratize, if they should use that word, data and the use of it.
Thank you for that. And perhaps connected, Tetsu also asked a question, do people in different communities and different parts of the world feel differently about sharing data? And how does that connect to the democratization of data? Maybe people are more comfortable with the level of data that's being collected from their smartphones, for example, or maybe people feel differently about the way that data and the types of data that's collected in research. So I would love to hear from perspectives, perhaps from different communities that our panelists have interacted with, and the values that those communities held that maybe affected their view of data and data sharing.
There are definitely different regulations all over the world in sharing data. Also different attitudes, and that's a fact. You know, the fact that data has not been shared has been a barrier to diversity. You know, having the pride that of their own data to protective on that data itself. So this is common happen in certain countries, but that's just something that we experience.
Yeah, I would say that one big barrier is this around this concept of data sharing is also the reason you hoard your data is because you think that you need to in order to protect your career opportunities. And I think that that's because we've incentivized science in a way that we focus on the individual rather than the team. And I think that we really have to rethink about that, right? So we really have to think about how do we, at least within our research institutions, start to incentivize team science rather than, you know, first author, last author, right? Those are the authorship positions of prominence that gets you promoted, that gets you grants, et cetera. But what happens then is that it promotes this idea that, oh, I need to keep this data to myself so that I can achieve these markers of success, right? Career success. So I do think that we need to be rethinking a bit more about how do we create different kinds of incentives to promote team science as really the way to go forward rather than individualized science.
And if I may add a little bit to that, so I think awareness creation is also important. In the from my experience, just like dementia is still seen as an old age disease, and therefore getting participants to participate in research is a problem, especially those in ethnic minority groups in developed countries, for example. So if you take a typical data set, you will see that just 5% of that represents the ethnic minority group. But if you look at the demographics, it's more than that. So, and the reason is that there's lack of awareness. People don't really understand the problem. So we need to create awareness, let people know about the need to engage in research, and that we will be able to develop, you know, interventions and preventive measures for that. Okay.
Thank you very much, everyone, for that discussion. I also see an interesting question here from Mukta from ADDI, who said that clinicians need to design different cognitive assessment tools for diverse populations, taking into consideration age, socioeconomic status, literacy level, language barriers, cultural variation, and I'm sure we could go on there too. So does this actually create biases in screening, taking into these factors into account? And how do we normalize all these factors when we're combining or perhaps harmonizing this diverse data, whether it's from diverse participants or from diverse data sources?
So as a neuropsychologist, I spent a little time worrying about how we don't assess cognition accurately. And so I think one of the things that we have to remember is that everything we do through our brain. And so there's lots of different ways in which we can actually assess cognition much more accurately than doing these biased tests that get sporadic information, which may or may not be accurate for that person's cognitive status at that particular moment, right? Our cognitive capabilities are actually very heterogeneous. They're changing all the time, and they're also multi-domain. So one of the things is to then rethink, what do we mean when we do a cognitive assessment? So understanding that, everything does come from our brain. One example of what I've tried to do is to focus on digital voice. And the reason is because speaking is actually a very cognitively complex task. And it turns out most people speak, and digital voice is very easy to capture. And so when you start to think about it that way, digital voice, then a raw digital voice recording comes with a richness of cognitive information. And if you do it at the raw recording level, then that you can do that across anybody, right? And if you think about sort of things like audio features that can be common, regardless of language, I think then you start to develop opportunities to think about, how do we measure cognition differently? You can also interpret cognition. So as we think about what are some of the common things, we all move, eat, sleep, right, and interact. And always we're always reflecting sort of our cognitive capabilities. So if we can think about using sort of, in my case, I think about using digital technologies that are widely out there to collect the cognitively related behaviors and then interpret that.
Thank you. That's such an interesting point about using the raw voice recordings and how rich that data must be. And I wanted to ask if Sammy had any thoughts on, from the perspective of the field of artificial intelligence, how we might harness the richness of that data. And I also imagine we can think about the challenges of how that might look on a data sharing platform. It's not tabular, it's not a spreadsheet. So how do we share that data, and how do we represent it while recognizing how nuanced that data might be to actually synthesize to be able to share? Sammy, you might have thoughts on that from the artificial intelligence world.
Yes, right, Alex. I mean, those sources of data are more or less the true data that we need to be able to build models that are really reflective of the phenomenon. The challenge has always been availability of techniques and tools that will be able to analyze, extract the data in a format that can be used to train the models. Thankfully, we've made a lot of progress in that direction. At the moment, we have tools that or techniques that we can use to extract speech data, for example, to train models. So yeah, I think there's a lot of research to be done, but we've made a lot of progress, and I think that's the future, really, if you want to overcome some of these limitations that have been outlined with the traditional way of collecting data.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And we do have another comment here from Nikki, who was touching on our earlier conversation, it looks like, about precision medicine and how that precision medicine might be a measure of success for if we really do achieve diversity in the field, we will have truly precise medicine. So I was wondering if anyone had any thoughts on, it looks like Nikki said we need to encourage a diverse array of biomarkers specifically that can predict disease and particular subsets, embracing the fact that dementia patients are heterogeneous. So I know earlier Rhoda also mentioned how that inclusivity is also a challenge in the same way that it's a benefit. So I would love to hear more about our perspective of collecting specifically diverse biomarkers and how that might influence precision medicine as we move forward.
So I can sort of mention, I agree with Nikki that I think we can be a little bit prescriptive in thinking that these are the particular risk factors for the disease. And the reality is that, we have this exposome that we live within, and each one of us has a different one that we're moving through. And so I think in that sense, that's where I think when we're thinking about, what data should we be collecting, we need to be a little bit more, well, again, I think we need to be less dependent on what has been done and more dependent on what are the critical factors on the ground in that local region or community. And I think that if we start to do that, then we'll start to collect, really the broad range. I think that there's probably lots of risk factors that we've never considered. I know my colleague here from Nigeria, mentioned that the risk factors for dementia among the African population that she looked at was very different proportionally. The cardiovascular risk factors were actually contributing less, but things like social isolation was actually a bigger contribution than you might see. So I think that it's just this idea that we believe that we know, and I think we're a little bit better off if we worry about what we know and focus a little bit more on probably what we don't know, and so that way we won't be so directive in how we conduct this research.
Go ahead, Sammy. I see that you unmuted yourself if you have anything to continue with.
Yes, I just wanted to add to what Rhoda said about focusing on what we don't know, and that is where AI comes in. My interest is actually looking at interaction of risk factors, and the interaction is always unique, and AI is very good at that, learning those low-level interaction, and we can use AI as a knowledge discovery tool to be able to explore novel interactions that we don't know about. So and we can only do that if we are able to get diverse biomarkers.
Thank you for that contribution. I appreciate learning about how AI can be a knowledge creator as well as a tool for researchers. And looks like in our last couple of minutes here, we can certainly have some closing remarks, but we did have a question from Manuela in the Q&A, which said, my question is for DY. How do you see public health playing a pivotal role in overcoming some of the challenges and barriers to implementing dementia studies with longitudinal designs, specifically in populations that are generally less studied? So we've been talking a lot about the science and the data. So would love to hear more about approaching this from the public health perspective as well.
Public health perspective play a significant pivotal role. It's a must, and that's why it's from a nationwide context. It's very crucial to see it from a public health perspective. There are many challenges and barriers for sure, especially in implementing dementia studies. Longitudinal study design, and also related to the issue of dementia is not necessarily a priority in certain countries in Asia Pacific. So this is why it's important to have evidence-based data, and also include that in the whole policy brief context, because the entry point is definitely from a public health perspective. And this is why, again, from the whole process of research process, introduce that to the government, seeing it from a public health perspective, that it gives them, it would make them look good from the Ministry of Health or government's perspective, because they will be equipped with all the data, with all the context, and it would lead to their own goals as well, because every country has their own health plan and strategy and all those things. So it's still a long way to go, to be honest, because of the keyword of working in silos, and this is why we have to all come together to work together. And this is why this diversity topic is very important, because it's not just of a cultural nation, but also diversity involving. Again, I keep on saying that this will be my keyword. Always involve people with dementia, promote diversity, and family carers, and using Rhoda's word earlier, let them lead that, we support them, and they should be at the center of all of our work.
Thank you so much. I think that's actually wraps up many of the points that we were discussing today. And I know we're 1 minute over our closing time. So I just wanted to say thank you so much again for our panelists today. I've truly learned so much, and I'm sure our audience has too. And thank you to those of the audience who contributed those amazing questions for our Q&A. I see Caitlin is here again, so I can turn the panel back over to ADDI, our hosts today. But I just wanted to say thank you again to our panelists for their time.
Same. That's
Thank
all I
you.
wanted to say. Really appreciate this invigorating discussion. We have a lot of work to do, just the beginning, as we all know. We really appreciate your time today. The recording will be available and more to come on this for sure. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.